G'day guys, and welcome back to the third episode of the Daily Discomfort podcast. If you've been following since the first episode, you would have seen and listened to an introduction to the mission, to the description of what this podcast is actually aiming to do. And in the second episode, we just talked a little bit about my background. Looking back on that, I probably didn't dive right into some of the things with my own upbringing and what I've dealt with in my life, but I want to make this podcast more about hearing other people's stories and also just giving you guys practical advice to take away and utilize in your life. Without further ado, getting stuck into the third episode today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this ethos of daily discomfort, embracing discomfort in our life so we can learn how to better overcome any other sort of adversity, and ideally being the guy that can balance high performance and growth in his life with his own mental well-being. So what we're going to look into today is actually breaking it up into three main topics that I want to discuss with you guys. So the first topic is just going to be constructive versus destructive discomfort and how we can look at that from both angles so you can know what are the ways that you can deal with any sort of challenges or stresses in your life and what are the ways that you probably shouldn't be doing it. So one's going to be a lot more productive, one's probably not so productive. Now, a lot of this is going to be based off my own opinion and my own perspective with what I see in the social media landscape, what I've seen on YouTube, and a lot of what I have seen as a guy trying to motivate himself, trying to lead this pathway to becoming a better version of myself, but seeing the bias to some of the information and content out there. Now, the second point is just giving you guys a simple model of how we could categorize different types of discomfort so you can know what you probably need to work on to become better in that area, better in this area and the other. So I'm going to break that down into three simple categories. And then finally, we're going to get to the practical component on it and we can reflect together in some ways that you can take away the information that I bring up in this episode and make it more actionable in your life. So how can you address those three categories of discomfort? How you can know whether something is being productive, constructive, or if it's being destructive and keeping you stuck, or at least not letting you grow into the man that you would like to be. So to kick things off, let's separate what I mean by constructive and destructive discomfort. The first thing that comes to mind that is most relatable to myself, and I'm damn sure to a few of you out there listening to this, is seeing exercise or pushing yourself with business as the only way for you to grow and develop as a person. It's your only meaning for success in your life. It is up there in your God values or your value hierarchy, and you probably base a lot of your self-worth on putting yourself through the ringer when it comes to training and really knuckling down when it comes to business. So to give you an example, for me, when I've had issues with study or business in the past, a challenge that I felt like I couldn't overcome at the time, instead of actually dealing with it or looking at it from another angle, sometimes I would actually just distract myself almost with it by saying I'm going to challenge myself with a heavy session in the gym, doing some heavy weights, going for a run, doing some Muay Thai, whatever it may be. So whilst I was challenging myself, whilst I was putting myself in a place of stress to get my body to respond better to that in future, it wasn't actually dealing with the problem at hand. Caveat to this, however, if you do this in a sense that it's strategic, so you're dealing with a certain problem with your business or your career, the studies that you're doing, maybe something in your relationship, or maybe just something that's been coming up and obstructing your emotional health. If you use it strategically in the method that you go and train or you're working towards some sort of competition or sporting event, but it actually helps you to deal with the problem at hand, that's a constructive way to look at embracing discomfort in that way, challenging yourself physically, looking after your health and your mental well-being, but not avoiding what the actual problem is. When we look at the flip side of that, if you're just constantly not addressing the problems in your life, whether it is with your mental well-being, whether it's repressed trauma that you know that you're holding on to, or maybe you don't. And you're constantly looking for the highs that you get through exercise. For anyone out there that maybe doesn't use exercise as the tool for that, and you're still getting on the drink, smoking, doing other drugs, maybe you've got some sort of tendencies or crux for watching heaps of TV, gaming, porn's another one, all these sorts of things, and you always find yourself using that to escape the reality of mentally, I'm pretty unwell. I'm dealing with depression. I'm not coping well. I've got a lot of anxiety. This is happening in my relationship and I'm just not dealing with it. I'm very reactive. So my fail-safe option is just to go for a run or just go lift weights, but you don't deal with the problem at hand. If we start to look at this through career mode or through building a business, it could be the same thing, that you're not dealing with inner trauma, dealing with emotions, dealing with problems with a relationship, and you're just going, well, if I work, that's going to take me away from this reality here. Realistically, when we look at constructive forms of discomfort in your life, they are the things that are ideally making you a well-rounded guy in all aspects: your physical fitness, your mental well-being, your career, your financial health, doing well in your relationships with an intimate partner, with your family, not avoiding certain conversations there, things that feel awkward or things where you're suppressing what you actually want to say and telling your truth, or you're becoming numb or distancing yourself from the person. So in its simplest terms, destructive discomfort is when you're using something like training or work, whatever it may be, to distract yourself or not actually deal with the problem at hand. And I bring this up because for a lot of guys, this is such a common theme. On one end of the spectrum, you've got the high performers who will use physical fitness, or they'll use their career or running their business and making money as the distraction from what else is going on in their life or what else is going on in their own mental well-being. And then you've got the other end who may not be at the point where they're using business or using exercise to that extent or for that reasoning, but that's where they're falling into drinking, doing drugs, gaming, whatever it may be. This is such a prime issue amongst men, is just not dealing with their shit. What you'll hear people say is that they are dealing with the problem. Now, to take this back one step, I would much rather hear a mate, or even thinking of this for myself, know that I can go to the gym because I'm not feeling well, or I'm anxious, or I'm angry about something. So I can actually put that energy in a positive place, but that ties back to doing it for a constructive reason. So maybe then I can revisit that problem in a better frame of mind after I've exerted myself, or maybe doing something in my business and pushing it where I need to be and giving myself a sense of competency and fulfillment through that puts me in a better headspace to actually deal with said problem at hand. So the big takeaway from this one is asking yourself the big why behind the actions that you take. If they feel reactive, if you feel like you're doing it to escape your reality or escape or run away from something else, that's where you need to start to critically think and redirect those actions. So moving on to the next point, I've tried to make this as simple and plain as possible. We've got physical, mental, and emotional discomfort. What we need to understand is that there probably is a lot of connections in interlinking between these three categories here, but I want to be able to give you a guideline or a framework so you can go away and maybe write down or on paper, or just think about this right now if you're out on a walk or a run, about how this would apply to you and how you can actually put in front of you or have the thought in your mind, all right, maybe I need to work on this physical aspect of discomfort a little bit more. Maybe it's the mental, maybe it's the emotional, maybe it's a combination of the three. So you don't need to be a genius to know this. Obviously, when we look at physical discomfort, we are looking at things like physical exercise. Now, I think if you are someone who's just getting into training, or even if you feel like your training is stagnating a little bit, I love this hybrid training philosophy that got brought to light by actually Alex Viada years and years ago. So when you see all these people talking about hybrid training and being a hybrid athlete now, this came from a guy who literally wrote a book on it, and he's got his second book coming. So if you're a bit of a nerd and you want to learn the science behind on that, becoming like the best strength and endurance athlete that you can be, I'd highly recommend looking up Alex Viada. And I use or give credit to that person because he's given us a good framework for this way of training. When we look at hybrid training, you're looking at doing strength, you're looking at doing heavy lifting in the gym, working on maximal strength, think of it like powerlifting, and then you're looking at hypertrophy work, so think of building muscle. Now, the way that Alex frames this and the way I actually saw represented in more of a diagram that he created in an online course that I completed through his business, it moved across the board. So you had strength on one side and endurance on the other, and kind of on the in between, I think it was more of like skill or tactical. So maybe even like looking at like Marines or Army. But when you look at skills too, like think of something like boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu. There's certain skills that people or sports that people want to become involved in, but maybe they want to get strong as fuck and build muscle. Maybe they want to be a really good runner as well. If you're like me, you probably like doing a lot of things because that's the way your mind works. So my best recommendations I could give you from pushing yourself physically would be not just to do it in one area unless you want to become a specialist. So unless you want to dedicate your training to powerlifting to be the best powerlifter you can be, you want to be the best runner you can be, or the best bodybuilder, or the best boxer, try to have more of this hybrid training approach. Focus on getting strong as hell, building some muscle, building endurance, and maybe even looking at a skill. I've only dealt with combat sports in my adult life, so learning Muay Thai was a thing for me that was just great for my own personal development and confidence building as well. Now, the other thing that I'll add in when we look at physical discomfort, we can look at it physical fitness, but if I were to write down right now something that I probably don't do enough to build a bit more mental toughness is something like an ice bath. I actually find ice baths super challenging. I don't mind the heat as much, like doing saunas. I could probably handle that a bit more, but getting in the ice bath and my hands and my feet just feeling like they're going to explode, that's definitely something that I can be transparent in saying that that's something I could do once or twice a week. Some blokes are doing this every morning that they wake up to develop a bit more discipline and really embrace discomfort in their life. So if that rings true to you, maybe that's something you could look at doing as well. Now, just looking at my notes here, when we go into the mental aspect of this, like I said, it's interlinked. So if we look at discipline, you need to apply that in your ability to get up every morning or go to the gym after work each time. So whatever these physical endeavors are that you've set out to actually include in your lifestyle to embrace discomfort through, you need that certain element of discomfort. You need to be able to focus on your goals and reflect on them and be honest with yourself to if you are working towards them. And then another big thing that I find I've been challenged with personally, and I'm sure you guys have as well, is just delaying gratification. If you look at something like building muscle, it can be a very long-term goal, right? If you're wanting to get to a certain size with your frame, with your physique, if you're looking at not only running a marathon, but also running for a certain time. Maybe you want to go like the sub 4, sub 3, depending where you are. These can be goals that take a lot of time. So I think there's a lot of mental effort required in these things. But I think what I want to focus on more so when it comes to mental discomfort is tackling things like limiting beliefs that you have on your own ability, maybe when it comes to the physical task. For the guy that's stuck in a job that he hates, not limiting yourself to the fact that this is the only job that you have to the rest of your life because you're not confident in your ability to learn more and do more in another career. And on that subject there, another mental challenge, I would say for myself in the past, was getting through university. I would much rather go out for a run, go lift some weights, than go sit there and study and put together some sort of like, or was it like a critical analysis like paper on fucking some supplement and nutrition unit I did, or having to do a subject like biomechanics where I had to relearn algebra, which I sucked at school. That was so uncomfortable for me to sit there in that position when my mind wants to go do anything else rather than focus on this. So that relates to that point of focus I made before. What are the mental tasks that you could set for yourself that actually require a fair bit of discipline? Is there something that you've wanted to learn in the past, or maybe that you need to learn to excel in your career? Sorry, we've got something float around in the air here. Excel in your career, or maybe just help you to understand yourself a bit more. Maybe it is reading more books, listening to more podcasts, and starting to unpack them and apply them to yourself and start to make some changes to your own character so you can be, I guess, the man that you want to be. Now, when we move into the next component, we start to look at emotions, right? So a big thing you would hear about in the men's mental health space, men's mental well-being space is vulnerability. I think my view on vulnerability is that no man should just be expected that they have to sit down in a room or broadcast over social media all the problems or all the limiting beliefs that they have in their mind or the trauma that's been suppressed over time, especially when they've held on to it so tight. There's this kind of description of, that typical macho guy who's got all this armor added off, and you can't just rip it off. It's painful, and I think they really need to go through some sort of system or process or be a part of a community where there is a bit of a methodology about how they unpack this all over time. However, in saying that, when it comes to being vulnerable, the other thing that I would add to this is that I don't expect myself or any guys I know to be vulnerable with everyone that they know, because I don't think everyone can be trusted with what you may perceive as your downfalls or with what your traumas are, because there are people who do prey on that and that may use that against you in some way, shape or form. So I think the point with emotional vulnerability is really analyzing who's there for you, and you may even have to do work on building trust with the people in your life. And I don't know your experiences, maybe that really has been broken in the past, but getting to a point where you can even start to be vulnerable with yourself and start to write things down or think about things and not blame yourself for feeling weak or actually having a cry, engaging with your emotions, or allowing yourself to be angry, but look at it from the fact that maybe it's not anger, but that anger is actually coming from rejection or another feeling that's stemming from your inner child experiences. I don't want to, again, dive too far down that pathway, because I think there's people with these sort of topics more within their scope of practice who I'd love to have on the podcast in future. And speaking of that, when it comes to emotional discomfort, maybe that means that you have to go speak to a specialist, to a therapist, someone with a professional background who can help you in that area. In my own experience, I haven't talked to a therapist. My own tools that I've probably used to engage with this aspect of being a little bit more vulnerable with my emotions, feeling them, and starting to reflect on them a bit more. I think a massive thing was yoga, as it helped me to connect with my body. It helped to calm me down. Engaging with pranayama or breath work is something too that puts me in a better mental space to look at how I am reacting to things and looking at a situation where I got angry or I got sad and seeing where that was really coming from. And then the other massive one here is journaling. Such an underused tool. And guys, one thing I want to add in with that point, think about some of the greatest men in history, and you think of the Stoics, right? Like Marcus Aurelius is just one of the classic ones that comes to mind, where they would just journal down and really investigate their own thoughts and things that happened in their minds and in their lives. I think it's a really lost art form, just the ability to put pen to paper and process what it is that you feel and what it is that you experience. And when you put it on paper, I think it's just a lot better perspective to look at it from, and you can be a lot more analytical with it. On that note, before we move on, there's definitely a difference between looking at emotions logically and actually feeling them. So what I mean by this is that I myself, and I've had mates who can talk about emotions, but it's coming from a very logical angle. They're like, oh yes, I was angry because da-da-da-da-da-da. But it's like, can you feel them? Can you allow yourself to cry and get upset about something, not judge yourself, and then sit back and see where it came from and give yourself having that tendency to do that? And then again, by doing all this sort of work here, maybe the breath work and the journaling or talking to the therapist, finding a way for you to deal with this better in future, but not feeling like you're a broken man just because you get angry or because you get sad or because you're depressed or because you're anxious. I think that's enough on this topic now. Otherwise, we just start to go down different rabbit holes and I probably start to talk a bit of shit. So moving on to the next point, let's make this more relatable now. I think we've thrown out a few little questions and reflections there, but I've got a few questions down here. So with what we've talked about currently, constructive and destructive discomfort, we've talked about the categories physical discomfort, mental and emotional. What discomfort are you resisting in your life? Are you the guy that doesn't want to sit still? You've always got to be doing something, whether it's training, whether it's running a business, whether it's watching TV. You've always got to be stimulated and you're always looking for the next thing because you're uncomfortable with stillness. You're uncomfortable with sitting there with your thoughts, with your emotions, with your own breath. If that's the thing, maybe you need to start to ask yourself the questions, why is that? Why am I not comfortable sitting with myself, being on my own? And you can start to dig a little bit deeper over time. The second question is, what is it costing you? So if you're that same guy, or however any of this episode relates to you, or whatever thoughts it provokes, what is it costing you in the fact that you react to emotions, limiting beliefs, whatever sort of mental discomfort that you have, or the fact that you overtrain or you undertrain? What is it all costing you? Is it costing you physical health and longevity? Has it cost you, or is it costing you a relationship? Maybe you're on the other side of things and you're not training enough, you've let yourself go, you're not passionate about your career anymore, and your partner starts to see that and they will lose value in you. They won't see you as the same person. I'm sorry to say, but that's your responsibility to work on that. But also I would recommend communicating with that person, which is a part of that uncomfortable conversation that you have. So start to think about, what is it all costing you in terms of physical health and fitness, longevity? Is it costing you years on your life? If you've got any sort of cruxes, if you like to become a little bit of a delinquent over the weekends, is that costing you productivity to your work in the week? Well, it probably is costing you some sort of damage to your health in the long run as well. Again, let's not go too far down the line here. That's more for you to contemplate. So to give you a bit of an example, if I ask myself, what sort of discomfort am I resisting in my own life, or maybe even over the years, because there's definitely patterns that I've noticed within myself that seem to be destructive, I think, for my own self-improvement, or even across my career or with my own health at times. I'll bring up 2 to 3 little things. So where am I resisting discomfort? One of the first things that comes up when I think about physical fitness, there's definitely been times where I'm probably not eating enough, or I'm cutting a little bit too much, trying to stay lean all the time. And that's costing me productivity when it comes to work, because if I've got low energy, I haven't got as much energy to put into the work or building the business. But also it doesn't establish the issue that I only feel like I'm worth something if I look a certain way. And even though I look healthy the majority of the time, the difference is I might be feeling great at 12 to 13% body fat, but I love the way I look at 7 or 8%, but I don't love the way I feel then. So the discomfort that I'm resisting there is pretty much related to my own limiting beliefs with my worth as a person based on how I look and my identity in the fitness industry. So another way that I can look at resisting discomfort in my own life is probably the factor that at this point in my career, 10 years into personal training, moving into teaching yoga, breath work, I feel like a bit of an imposter at times, and there's things that I probably put off in the past when it comes to taking the move, breathe, connect model from the run club into the corporate world. There's limiting beliefs in that there. So I've got to ask myself the questions, why I'm not taking those steps. Where is that coming from? Where is that fear of judgment or failure coming from? And how can I process that using some of the things that we've talked about? So finishing up on these notes today, please take the time to reflect, guys. What is it that you're resisting? What discomforts have you been avoiding? Use those categories, physical, mental, and emotional. Write it down if you need to. Feel free to send me a message on Instagram or on YouTube. Well, if you comment on YouTube, it's not anonymous, so maybe message on Instagram at dailydiscomfortau or at Coach Michael Stone. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this or how this applies to your life. So just remember that discomfort isn't going to be an optional thing. It's always going to be there. Life's always going to throw it at you. And as men, we need to embrace it because it's always going to be there. And you'd much rather be the guy that can handle it, bounce back, and is resilient enough to move on, as opposed to being the guy that will crumble and will always play the victim card and will blame his circumstances or blame other people. You're going to be a much better leader of yourself and a leader and male figure to other people in your life when you start to reframe the way that you perceive life and when you start to embrace the challenges and be honest with yourself with what those challenges are and what you're avoiding, because we tend to have certain biases when we pick and choose challenges, because even though it might be a little bit uncomfortable, there's probably something out there that we're avoiding that is going to be a shitload harder. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Look forward to hearing from you soon. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next YouTube video or the next podcast episode. See yous.